The world of Harry Potter is one filled with magic. Sure, it's kind of the premise. However, building that world took an incredible amount of care, ingenuity, quite a bit of money, and of course that secret ingredient behind all works of art, imagination. Whether it's the subtle art of CGI nose replacement or building animatronic faces for 6'10" actors, the amount of work put into crafting this incredible franchise really can't be overstated. When Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone came out in 2001, we were just a month away from the domineering force that was Fellowship of the Ring. In short, 2001 would go down as one of the most revolutionary years in special effects, and the team behind Harry Potter would wind up looking to the past and the future for their fantasy world. A film adaptation of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, the Sorcerer's Stone to us Yanks, was announced in 1999 after Warner Brothers bought the film rights for a hair over $1.5 million. Now this was just 2 years after the first book hit shelves, sparking an international phenomenon that would more than make up for Warner's investment. Chris Columbus, who brought a full-length script to his meeting with producer David Heyman, wound up in the director's chair for the first 2 films in this mammoth franchise, only stepping away so that he could spend more time with his family. With Columbus came a whole bunch of other voices behind the camera that would go on to have a massive effect on the franchise's decade-plus journey. Notably, production designer Stuart Craig.
What is this world? What does it look like? You always start with the novel.
For the Look of Hogwarts, Stuart Craig turned to a mix of churches and universities, all of which were chosen due to J.K. Rowling describing the antiquity of the location. At first, Craig wasn't thrilled with the results.
And I think in some respects, I have to say, we failed.
As time went on, the school became more and more reliant on CGI, something that naysayers might call out as a bad choice, but wound up working very well for that silhouette and expanding on the possibilities of this fantastical place. While the first boat ride to Hogwarts in Philosopher's Stone is no doubt iconic, Craig worked tirelessly to ensure that the one issue he had with it was perfected over time.
What has happened since then, on all the subsequent movies, we have slowly improved the silhouette of those things.
Of course, there's more to Hogwarts than that ever-evolving silhouette. Inside, we have all sorts of hallways, classrooms, and of course the Great Hall. While this version of the book's wizarding lunchroom is incredibly large, it's actually slightly smaller than the book's Great Hall. In the novels, the room can accommodate a nearly unfathomable 900 kids, but for practicality's sake, that was trimmed down to about 400-ish. Most of the Great Hall, minus the obviously CGI ceiling, was built with actual wood and stone, which was great, but there was one detail that wound up not working: the candles. Initially, the team decided to not go the computer route, instead going old school with the candles held up on strings. This led to some truly stellar shots, until they started falling due to the flame burning through the wires. As such, these wound up being accomplished with CGI for the rest of the series. As the franchise went on into its final installments, much of the school would be expanded using green screen and digital sets to really nail that epic feel necessary for the Battle of Hogwarts. It wasn't just the wizarding world that needed large construction efforts, though. This big old matte painting was used to extend Privet Drive, which was initially shot on location before being moved to a more crew-hospitable area where the production team built around 10 houses, letting an old-school trick pull off the illusion of a never-ending suburban hellscape. Of course, with additional green screen work for much larger shots. For other settings, like Diagon Alley, green screen was used in lieu of matte paintings to extend the world. For costuming, the changes from the book have gone on to influence even hardcore fans' interpretations. Where the books feature robes without much detail regarding what they are wearing underneath, the films went with an English schoolchildren look, complete with the matching uniforms made distinct by house color ties. As the franchise evolved, more and more Muggle costuming would be utilized, starting mostly with Prisoner of Azkaban's more relaxed look, but those snappy uniforms would remain a constant, even if they wound up a little unkempt. Jenny Tamim, who took over as costume designer in Prisoner of Azkaban, said of the costumes, "The first 2 Potter films were very Christmas Carol. Alfonso Cuarón wanted to have something more realistic. Simply put, these kids are growing older, they're teenagers, and they're gonna dress like teenagers. This included less regard for uniforms and wearing more Muggle clothing. Cuarón knew that these actors knew their characters better than he did at this point, so he let them pour their own personality into their costuming choices. Some actors took this to mean untucked and wrinkled shirts, while others, like Tom Felton, added their own panache with Slytherin rings and tie clips. The choice for the post-Columbus directors to trust the actors helped keep the characters consistent and fresh throughout the creative team changes. That let Columbus's vision carry on as he laid the groundwork. Meanwhile, the creature and special effects teams remained consistent. Now, when I bring up the special effects of the Harry Potter movies, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Okay, that's not what most people would bring up, but sure, let's start there. No lie, the first iteration of the troll looked, not great when it wasn't lying on the floor, but we almost got trolls again in Half-Blood Prince, in which they were going to perform ballet. Which, on the one hand, might be one of those oft-discussed bizarre changes in some alternate universe, but I for one am devastated we never got to that concept in motion. Okay, but seriously, probably the first legit slice of VFX wizardry most recall is the pitch-perfect look of Ralph Fiennes as Voldemort. It's almost as iconic as that boy who lived fella's glasses and scar combo. To create this look, a mix of makeup, prosthetics, and CGI were used. Fiennes' noggin was given a pale complexion, veins, 2 less eyebrows, and a whole bunch of dots to help the computer squad work their magic. And honestly, for a series that's more than a little uneven in its CGI, this is some stellar work, and while simpler than, say, a big dragon, that little disappearing nose trick provided us with the perfect look for the series' big bad. Oh, and that dragon, while gloriously brought to life by CGI in its breathtaking attempts at murdering Daniel Radcliffe, did get a practical version for when it was caged. By no means necessary, but a lovely reminder that even 4 movies in, the team was quick to go practical whenever possible. This is similar to Buckbeak, who, while computer animated for most of his sequences, did get the practical treatment, albeit for just a few shots. Still, it's a wondrous bit of engineering. Likewise, Fox's animatronic version was good enough to fool Richard Harris.
Richard Harris comes over to us and he says, "It's absolutely amazing how they train these things, isn't it?"
Other performances were aided by a little more heavy-duty methods. Lovable groundskeeper Hagrid is played by Robbie Coltrane, who stands at a less than impressive 6'1". To accomplish most shots, the crew just had to use basic perspective tricks, like filming upward or building 2 different sets, with one smaller to make Hagrid look, well, giant. However, for wide shots, the use of a 6'10" double in a Hagrid bodysuit was utilized, complete with his own oversized chair between scenes. The double even got an animatronic Hagrid mask, onto which VFX artists composited Robbie Coltrane's face. Well, sometimes. Other times they just let the nightmare fuel last on the screen, staring into your soul. Meanwhile, early use of silicone appliances is one of the few things truly innovative about the Potter films, primarily in crafting the Gringotts goblins, who, thanks to their own more squat look, were able to be played by humans in sometimes rather oppressive makeup. The Basilisk, the giant serpent that gets a sword through its head in one of Harry Potter's most badass moments, is one of the more awe-inspiring creatures in the first few films. And while wide shots and action sequences were heavy on the CG side, a massive animatronic version was created and wound up lending a ton of credence to the Chamber of Secrets' most horrifying resident. Meanwhile, in the woods outside Hogwarts, the dreaded Aragog was built as a full-sized puppet with his hungry children made with CGI.
Can we panic now?
With a few practicals sprinkled in just to get things right. Now, this use of both CGI and practical, highly detailed puppets and models is one of those tricks employed by Harry Potter that's sort of a remnant of the 90s. While today we see entire worlds designed in a computer to look live action, back then such an idea was ludicrous. The tech just wasn't there, and so movies like Jurassic Park and Terminator 2 used a smart mix of both, generally relying on a practical creation in every possible moment. Movies like Star Wars Episode 1 did a good job of developing full CGI characters with a degree of realism, but for best results, it was still best to mix real with unreal. In Chamber of Secrets, Columbus and his team opted for a fully CGI Dobby. Oddly enough, the same year Gollum got his proper debut in The Two Towers. The Potter films would never quite match Weta Digital's hyper-detailed creation, but in order to accurately translate the book's description, they'd have to try. Columbus described the challenge. Dobby's about 3 feet tall, and his neck is the size of someone's wrist. It's hard to find people with necks that small.
Our goal for Dobby was to create a character that the audience would fall in love with.
To get Dobby right, the team used the tried-and-true method of having the actors react to a ball on a stick, although later more doubles would be utilized, although even those would need to be painted out for the digital creation. In other instances, fully CGI creatures had to be utilized in lieu of any other option. For Lupin's werewolf transformation, there's no practical creature beyond some mid-transformation prosthetics.
We wanted to challenge the concept.
Wayne did a drawing that was of a werewolf that was looking a bit more pathetic and a bit more kind of sad and a bit kind of messed up. And that kind of had a spirit that Alfonso liked.
The team tried their best to create a suit to accomplish Cuarón's vision of a spindly lycanthrope, but nothing, stilts, wires, animatronics, got the job done. So this highly debated good boy was built digitally. Other out there creations like the Dementors and Inferi were created digitally. Meanwhile, even more CG-intensive sequences proved to be a challenge within the series. Quidditch is the most glaring, with the first film specifically featuring some less than stellar green screen work. While certain scenes, like this one featuring Neville on his broom, were accomplished as practically as possible, and thusly age far better, the actual sport is something that took a while to really get a handle on. Prisoner of Azkaban's big matchup, which ends with Harry getting taken out by Dementors, uses fog and rain to add more visual might to the action. Beyond this point, more action and heavily CGI'd sequences would rely on other elements to cover up any lasting issues, something the Chris Columbus films don't even attempt, much to their detriment. What really surprised me while delving into the nitty-gritty of Harry Potter's many behind-the-scenes voices was just how important Columbus was to the franchise. He was arguably the most important singular voice in the Harry Potter film universe, even if his initial creations would be made better by other creatives as the years went by. And he knows his foundations were flawed.
If I could go back and do it again, I would love to go back and do it again, because I would give myself more time to do the visual effects the way they should be done.
Prisoner of Azkaban and Goblet of Fire are, in hindsight, the two films which stumble around the most as the series sought to find itself after Chris Columbus's departure. They're also two of the most controversial among the fanbase, with both taking liberties fans still consider deal-breakers. Alfonso Cuarón's Azkaban seems to be the most despised due to its tossing of important plot elements and the interpretations of some of the characters, while Mike Newell's Goblet of Fire makes curious changes like making the two foreign houses exclusively male and female, and exercising the entirety of the Quidditch World Cup. At the same time, they introduce important and haunting elements. Sirius Black and Remus Lupin make their debuts in Azkaban, while Goblet of Fire introduces Ralph Fiennes as the newly reborn Voldemort, who makes quite the impression by giving audiences one of the most heartbreaking moments in the franchise. Then came David Yates. Now, my personal opinion is that Yates films don't work quite as well on their own as the two previous entries. In fact, and I'm sure all the Potter fans in the comments will verbally rip my head off for this, I prefer Prisoner of Azkaban as a film. It just has a very specific, quirky feel that's entirely thanks to Cuarón's unique voice. However, even I can see that it just makes too many changes for a series that's meant to satisfy one of the biggest fan bases in the world at the time. When Yates comes around, the series becomes a little less wide-eyed and quirky and more dark and serious, which, to be fair, is in keeping with the progression of the books as our young heroes enter into this vast world, become accustomed to it, and contend with increasingly dark, cruel forces. What Yates does well is take these disparate elements, the wonder and uniformity of Columbus, the more prominent mix of modern elements from Cuarón, as well as his giving the actors plenty of leeway, and the more dark, monochromatic look of Newell. How much of this evolution is down to producer David Heyman is a bit up in the air, but the final product suggests that Yates saw the elements that worked and best informed his world and combined them for 4 films that feel polished and uniform. The major flaws have been ironed out, and the best elements from previous entries have been kept and integrated in such a way as to not overpower either the reader or strictly film viewer coming in. In a way, this is very much a Hollywoodized version. It's not taking any great risks like the Cuarón version, and instead is seeking to please as much of the audience as possible. And for a billion-dollar franchise with a pretty darn big audience, it's hard to argue with this methodology. So as you can see, the world of Harry Potter was built not only on the imaginative foundations set by its author, but also by the hard work of a lot of men and women who combined pushed all kinds of digital and physical ingenuity to the test. This massive undertaking not only resulted in 8 shockingly good films, but also a new landscape for cinema. Just as Lord of the Rings helped to usher in Game of Thrones, the Hobbit trilogy, and In the Name of the King, A Dungeon Siege Tale, Harry Potter set the template for a whole menagerie of young adult adaptations, including Twilight, The Hunger Games, and Maze Runner. It also changed how fans saw the wizarding world, giving it new elements that would be readily folded into canon by Potter faithful. Heck, we're not even getting new books anymore. We're getting new movies, and no matter what you might think of the Fantastic Beasts films, goodness knows I have some thoughts, that's still one hell of a triumph, and it's thanks in no small part to the team who built the world of Harry Potter and brought an epic tale of magic, teen angst, and horrifying animatronic faces to the world. There is a ton more to talk about with Harry Potter. It is quite literally a massive world in and of itself. There's a bunch of great extras, special features that we used, all of which helped me to better appreciate the wizarding world itself. And if you'd like more in-depth Harry Potter content, and tell us how you feel. Have a good one.